Mr. Speaker.
I call Andrew Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to be talking on this piece of legislation, or this bill. And just want to cover some of the key elements of it. And it's been a very interesting process that we've been through in the Select Committee. But in essence, what this bill is about is seeking to make the workplace fairer and more productive, not only for the employer, but also for the employee. And as the Minister said earlier, really has three key areas where it's focused on: the parental leave and payments, and secondly, enhancing the enforcement of employment standards, and thirdly, about prohibiting certain unfair employment practices. And I think everyone has agreed across the House that there is a need to refine and improve the situation. And it's good to hear and to see people working collaboratively on that. But just in terms of the paid parental leave obligations, as everyone knows, we've increased the paid parental leave from 16 to 18 weeks coming into force next year. But what this bill provides for, is that recognition around preterm babies. And this is a really important concept. And basically it means that for anyone who has a baby before the full term of 37 weeks, there is an additional adjustment made. So, for instance, if someone was to have a baby at 28 weeks, they would get 9 weeks of additional paid parental leave in addition to the existing 16 weeks at the moment, increasing to 18 weeks. Secondly, we've refined the keeping in touch provisions for mothers who go off to look after their babies and clarified the rules around that. And thirdly, we've extended the definition of primary carer, and this is a very important fact because what it means is it now recognises that it may not only just be the biological parents that are involved in the full-time care of a child, it might be grandparents or other family members. And so what that means is that these people now can also benefit from similar provisions. The second area is around the stopping unfair employment or practices. And it really addresses the unfair practices by prohibiting certain practices that undermine the mutuality of obligations. In particular, it requires employers now to specify in the employment contract with the employee the hours of work. And it prohibits employers requiring employees to be available for hours in excess of those specified hours unless the employee has the absolute right to refuse that work with no subsequent penalties or whatever, or secondly, compensation is paid. And there's also a requirement to specify in the employment contract what is the required sufficient notice period if you're going to cancel a shift. It's an issue that was very vexing to the committee and we considered very appropriately, and now there's a requirement for appropriate compensation payable to the employee in that situation where a shift is cancelled. And it also prohibits employers from forcing employees not to work for other employers. Sometimes this is appropriate if there's IP or other such matters, and so there must be genuine grounds for it, but that genuine grounds must be set out in the employer's and employees' employment agreement. And finally, in terms of enforcement of minimum employment standards, there's sort of three key areas that this bill addresses. First of all, there is now a specific requirement to keep sufficient details of hours of work. We were concerned that in certain circumstances people were working much longer than their hours of work, and what this makes clear is that the requirement on employees to keep a record of it, because in effect you can work out what the hourly rate is on an actual hours work basis. Secondly, and related to that, we've strengthened the provisions for labour inspectors to go into workplaces and enforce these provisions. And thirdly, we've imposed tougher sanctions on employers wanting to breach these employment standards. And just by way of note, for individuals, that fine or penalties have been increased to $50,000, and for corporates it's been increased to $100,000, or 3 times the gain that they may have got from doing inappropriate employment practices. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a very composite bill. It's a difficult area, there are many different types of employers, different types of roles. Some people are very happy to work in a casual situation, others are not. And what we've sought to do is draw a balance between those arrangements, taking into account the myriad of employment arrangements across New Zealand. And so, Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.